Chancellor Pascal Lamy, the Director of the World Trade Organization, fellow guests, and particularly James and Lillian Martin, who inspired the vision of the Oxford Martin School and have led us to be here today. It's a great honor and a privilege to be welcoming you on what I know will be an exciting evening of mind food and also discussion that follows. The aim of the Oxford Martin School is to bring the best people together to work on some of the biggest challenges of the 21st century, and I'm privileged to be its director. Among the very wide range of issues we are focusing on across over 20 disciplines, on those that surface global governance. Indeed, what has come from our work on poverty, on climate change, on pandemics, on economic crises, on health and demographics, and in every different area we focus on, is this question of who is going to manage this going into the future. Whose hands are on the global wheel? Who will be taking care for future generations? How do we bring national governments and global governance together to ensure that we navigate this increasingly complex environment, to ensure that future generations inherit an even better world than we have? It's a time of most remarkable opportunity, a time when we could overcome the greatest challenge, but it's also a perilous time, a time when we need wise people at the helm, people that can translate and help us translate powerful ideas into global solutions. And tonight we are most fortunate to have with us the foremost thinker amongst the leaders of the international organizations to provide insights into this question. We are doubly fortunate that we are also having with us tonight the Chancellor of the University, who will introduce Pascal Lamy and be on the panel with him afterwards. At a time when questions are asked about Europe's future, it's wonderful to see in these two former commissioners that there's real life after the European Commission. Lord Patten of Barnes, like Pascal Lamy, is one of the very few rare individuals who's been able to combine high political office with deep thinking. This thinking transcends national boundaries. It demonstrates an unwavering commitment to inclusive globalization. The Chancellor studied at what, in my very biased way, I regard as the best of the Oxford colleges, being a member, Balliol. But when he studied there in the 60s, it was also amongst the most liberal. He demonstrated his independence of mind then by going on to join the Conservative Party. Not many people from Balliol did that. He became the head of its research department and later its chairman. After being elected the MP for Bath, he held a wide variety of ministerial posts, including education, Northern Ireland, environment, and overseas development. In 1992, he became governor of Hong Kong. And as you know, many governor positions may be regarded as a sinecure. But this was the most challenging of posts, handing over Hong Kong to China. Well, having spent time with him in Hong Kong and Beijing, I can attest to this most remarkable thing, that both the people in Beijing and Hong Kong believe he made a very good deal for them, and a deal that stuck and proved itself over time. So that ability was, I think, one of the great signs of his high intellect, but ability to win trust and think through extremely complicated situations. He was given after that the challenge of the Police Commission in Northern Ireland, and then at the same time as Pascal was at the Commission, became the Commissioner for Foreign Affairs at the European Union. All that was, of course, but a preparation for the complexities of Oxford, where he is now Chancellor. While doing all of this, he's also written an amazing number of books which I commend to you, like What's Next? Surviving the 21st Century. He's been a great supporter of the Oxford Martin School and, of course, of Oxford University as a whole. And I'm delighted to invite him to introduce Pascal Lamy.
Ian, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you for confirming that there is life after the European Commission. The fact that I'm also now a member of the House of Lords proves in addition that there's life after death. Just threw that in case Professor Dawkins was in the audience. It's a particular privilege and a great personal pleasure to be able to welcome Pascal Lamy to Oxford University to deliver this lecture under the auspices of the Martin School. And I'm delighted that Dr. Martin is with us this evening with his wife. And I'm also pleased that another of our considerable benefactors, Martin Smith, is with us as well. And we owe both of them and others a huge debt of gratitude. Pascal Lamy, as Ian suggested, is one of the greatest international public servants of the last, or this, generation. After university and ENA, he became an inspecteur des finances, which of course he still is today. But he's done one or two other things along the road. He worked in the Trésor and for the French finance minister and prime minister. He then became chef de cabinet in Brussels for Jacques Delors, who wasn't as universally popular with the British Prime Minister at the time as perhaps he deserved. And Pascal Lamy certainly ensured that the European Commission was not relegated to a back seat or decommissioned in those days. After a very distinguished period in Brussels, he then went back and helped sort out the odd bank, and then came back, which is when we got to know one another, as the European Commissioner for Trade from 1999 to 2004. And we worked, I think I can say, constructively and amicably together, defying all the skeptics who thought it was impossible for a French public servant and a Brit to work together without coming to blows. I think we had a very good relationship, and I grew to appreciate and admire Pascal's intellect and ability to get things done. He was, I think, the central European figure. He was certainly the central European figure in negotiating China's access to the World Trade Organization. Probably certainly one of the most important things that's happened to China and to the world in the last few years. And as an occasional bystander, it was enormously entertaining intellectually to watch Pascal and lock horns with Zhu Rongji, who is certainly the most impressive other public servant that I've ever seen in action. Pascal has gone on to be, as you know, the Director General of the World Trade Organization, battling heroically to close the gap between the rhetoric of world leaders and what they're actually prepared to stand up for and get done. And I'm afraid the sad truth is that that gap has grown wider over the years. Pascal is an intellectual, which is permissible in France, though, as you know, it's a capital offense in this country, and a very wise and effective administrator. It's not always the case that intellectuals are good at getting things done, but Pascal certainly is. And I'm certainly looking forward to hearing what he has to say to us this evening. It's, as I said, both pleasure and privilege, and I welcome him to Oxford with con brio. Pascal.
Well, Chancellor, dear Chris, Professor Goldin, dear Jan, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me, of course, a great pleasure to be here in Oxford today to share my views on global governance, an issue on which the Martin School is very active. Tackling global future challenges is, I understand, one of the main focuses of your work in the Martin School. Rightly so. I also believe that it's one of the main challenges, if not the main challenges of our time. Now, we obviously live in a world of ever-growing interdependence and interconnectedness. In fact, our interdependence has grown beyond anyone's imagination. Economic and financial shocks spread faster than ever before. With the recent economic crisis, we've discovered that the collapse of one part of an economy can trigger a chain reaction across the whole globe for the first time in history. We've discovered with the climate crisis that our planet is an indivisible whole. With the food crisis, we've discovered that we are dependent on each other's production and policies to feed ourselves. And with the flu epidemic, that speedy international cooperation can be vital. So the scope of the challenges the world is facing has changed profoundly in the past decades, more profoundly, I suspect, than we fully understand. And the world of today is virtually unrecognizable from the world in which we lived a generation ago. Just look at the way trade is taking place. Thanks to lower transport prices, communication, information technologies, it now costs less to ship a container from Marseille to Shanghai than to move it across Europe. Production chains have become truly global, with companies locating various stages of the production process in the most cost-efficient markets. The most striking example of this globalization of the production chains is Apple, whose famous iPad is designed in the US, manufactured with components from Japan, Korea, and several other Asian countries, and assembled in China by a company from Chinese Taipei. Nowadays, most products are not made in the UK or made in France. They are, in fact, made in the world. And the frontier between domestic trade and inter/national trade is blurring. The very notion of nations trading with each other has become questionable. Now, on the governance side, for sure, over the past 70 years, we've slowly constructed a legal, institutional framework to try and manage closer economic integration, whether at the regional or the global level. And of course, the WTO is one bit of this scheme, with responsibility for the governance of global trade relations. Yet, with the world becoming ever more interconnected and challenge becoming more and more global, governance remains to a large extent local. And the discrepancy between the reality of today's interdependence, the challenges that result from it, and the capacity of governments to agree politically on how to deal with them is increasingly striking. For the international system is founded on the principles and politics of national sovereignty. The Westphalian Order of 1648, some time ago, remains very much alive in the international architecture of today. In the absence of a global government, global governance results from the action of sovereign states. It is inter/national, between nations. In other words, global governance is the globalization of local governance. But it doesn't suffice to establish informal groupings or specialized international organizations, each of them being member-driven, as we say, to ensure a coherent and efficient approach to address the global problems of our time. In fact, the Westphalian Order is a challenge in itself. The recent crisis has demonstrated that brutally. Local politics have taken over, have taken the upper hand over addressing global issues. Governments are today too busy dealing with domestic issues to dedicate sufficient attention, sufficient energy to multilateral issues and negotiations, be they trade negotiations or climate negotiations. Now, I see four main challenges for global governance today. The first one is leadership. Leadership meaning the capacity to embody a vision and inspire action in order to create political momentum. Who is the global leader? Should it be a superpower? Should it be a group of national leaders selected by whom? Or should it be some sort of international organization? The second challenge is the one of efficiency. And by efficiency, I mean a capacity to mobilize resources, to solve the problems in the international sphere, to bring about concrete, visible results for the benefit of the people. And the main challenge here is that this Westphalian Order gives a premium to naysayers who can block decisions, thereby impeding results. The ensuing viscosity of international decision-making puts into question the efficiency of the international system. The third challenge, as I see it, is coherence. For the international system is based on specialization. Each international organization focuses on a limited number of issues. We, in the World Trade Organization, deal with trade, the International Labor Organizations with labor issues, the World Meteorological Organization with meteorology, and so the list continues. And I think it's a fact that the UN is not really overarching and coherence-producing, assuming this was the initial intention when the UN were created. The last and probably more compelling challenge that I see in global governance is the one of legitimacy. And this is because legitimacy is, in my view, intrinsically linked to proximity, to a sense of togetherness, and by togetherness I mean the shared feeling of belonging to a community. And this feeling, which is generally strong at the local level or at the national level, tends to weaken significantly as distance to nearby power system grows. It finds its roots in common myths, in a common history, in a collective cultural heritage, which is why it's no surprise that taxation or redistribution remain mostly local. Now, if we try to observe reality, which I believe is a reasonably safe way of checking your theory, there is one place where attempts to deal with these challenges have been made and where new forms of governance, supranational governance, have been tested for the last 60 years, and that's Europe. The European construction remains today the most ambitious experiment in supranational governance ever attempted. It is the story of desired, delineated, organized interdependence between its member states. So let's check how has this endeavor coped with these challenges I've just briefly outlined. First, on the question of efficiency, Europe scores, in my view, rather highly, thanks to the primacy of EU law over national law, thanks to the work of the European Court of Justice in ensuring enforcement and respect for the rule of law, thanks to a clear articulation between the Commission, the European Parliament, the European Court of Justice. It also scores reasonably nicely from the point of view of redistribution policies, a sort of test of collective action. If you take the example of the European structural funds and cohesion policies, they've overall played a key role in the development of European regions, member states, and helped at the time to cope with the competitive challenge of the creation of the internal market. Now, the picture is more nuanced if we look at the issue of leadership. I think Europe has had a relatively good record in terms of leadership as long as the leadership of the European Commission was accepted. It is the Commission who pushed through the creation of the internal market in the early 90s, of the euro, in the late 90s, two successors, in my view, even if not irreversible, of the European construction project. But today, leadership is blurred by this everyday competition between the President of the Commission and the President of the European Council. This competition does not only affect Europe's leadership, it also weakens the coherence of European actions, and it also affects, I can tell you, the manner in which Europe is perceived abroad. Finally, legitimacy is the area in which, in my view, Europe scores less well. The reality shows a growing distance between European public opinions and the European project. One could have expected that the European institutional setup, with growing powers entrusted to the European Parliament, would have resulted in greater legitimacy. But this is contradicted by the declining numbers of participation in elections to the European Parliament. Europe continues to be seen as distant, far away from the everyday lives and everyday concerns of citizens. And despite constant efforts to adjust, to adapt European institutions to democratic requirements, and that has been done for the last 50 years, there has been no resulting democratic spark. Euroscepticism is on the rise, and I'm talking Europe at large, often encouraged by politicians who are tempted to use Europe as a scapegoat for the difficult decisions they have to take at home, a fortiori in times of crisis. So, legitimacy remains a litmus test for Europe. Now, as we all know, these are not easy times for the European integration process, with doubts emerging about its future course. I nevertheless believe that it teaches us valuable lessons for global governance. And let me now try and lay out a few pragmatic ideas for a possible way in order to try and bridge this global governance deficit. First, the European experience offers valuable lessons both in terms of institutions and tools. In terms of institutions, the European integration process shows that supranational governance can work. Not extremely well, but can work. Many difficulties, but the truth also is that it's highly unlikely that what was done at European level could be replicated as such at international level. The European integration paradigm was developed under very specific conditions of temperature and pressure. It was shaped by the geographical and historical heritage of a European continent devastated by two world wars and a genocide. Hence, a very high, strong aspiration for peace, for stability, for prosperity. But it's also my firm conviction, however, that one could find a way to better articulate three elements of governance at the global level through what I have previously called the triangle of coherence, which address leadership, legitimacy, and efficiency. On the one side of the triangle lies today the G20, replacing the former G8 and providing some political leadership, some political direction, and some coherence. The second side of the triangle is the United Nations, which can provide a framework for global legitimacy through proper accountability. And on the third side lie member-driven international organizations providing expertise and specialized inputs, be they rules, which is the WTO business, policies, which is the World Bank business, or programs, which is the UNDP business. And I think this triangle of global governance is slowly emerging. Bridges linking the G20 to international organizations and the UN system have started to be built. I myself participate in G20 meetings alongside the heads of a number of other international organizations. The presidency of the G20 has organized regular briefings at the UN General Assembly. Specific sessions dedicated to trade have been regularly organized during G20 summits, giving us at the WTO some not all, but some of the political impetus we need. For example, the political backing of the G20 allowed me, at the dawn of the 2008 financial crisis, to launch a new, strengthened monitoring of trade policy development, which has so far proved a useful and even a powerful tool to contain inevitable protectionist pressures during time of severe economic and social crisis. Now, in terms of tools, I believe that the European experience of rulemaking, transparency, peer review offers interesting avenues for the global level. For instance, peer review appears to me as a sort of efficient Westphalian tool of governance, in that it sort of leverages the pride of sovereign nations when reviewed by their peers. Second idea in trying to move forward is, of course, the importance of regionalism. Regional integration processes which permit a progressive familiarization with supranationality should, in my view, be further encouraged. Regional integration also allows to address the questions of our time at a level where there is this affectio societatis, which in many ways is missing at the global level. At a level where the feeling of belonging, of togetherness is, let's say, more solid. And regional integration then represents the essential intermediate step between the national and the global governance level. Central America, Eastern Africa, the ASEAN are, I believe, good examples of this in the world of today. But of course, regionalism is not the magical recipe. It may suffer from the same difficulties as global governance, sort of falling victim of nationalistic tendencies that drag the level of ambition down. And we've seen this in regional integration processes recently as a consequence of the economic and social crisis. Now, finally, and that's a big challenge, but in my view, a real indispensable issue to cope with, which is the question of values. Institutions alone, be they regional or international, cannot do the trick. Our experience with global governance to date, I think, shows it. A successful governance system requires not only an institutional machinery, but also a common objective and shared values. Back to Europe, the success of the European monetary integration process is the result of the coming together of shared values and a common goal. It's the combination of these two elements that led to the establishment of an institutional machinery as far as the purely monetary field was concerned. And the value that underpins the governance of the euro system is price stability. This creation of the euro and the sort of identification of what is the basement of this governance system took 30 years between the Werner report of 1969 and the Delors report on the economic and monetary union. And as a result of that, the institutional structure followed quickly with the creation of the European Central Bank, which is certainly the most federal of all European institutions. And that was decided in 3 weeks only. But of course now, today, Europe realizes that the monetary integration cannot function without a deeper economic and political institutional integration. We now know that a common currency is not enough. It requires other, stronger common European economic policies. And at the same time, the existing institutions cannot compensate for the lack of shared values and common goals with respect to this much needed further European economic integration. And in my sense, absent a proper discussion, not just about techniques, tools, not just about the technocratic side of this, but about the political side of this, as it moves together value-based issues. Without that, I deeply believe that Europe will continue to limp. So what are we missing in the case of global governance? We already have a set of institutional machineries in some areas, but these are not underpinned by a sufficiently strong set of core principles and values. And this is, in my view, the area where global governance really falls short. What's lacking today is a platform of common values at the international level, in the name of which actions would be taken. The question of social inequalities, for instance, is not embodied in the UN vision as designed in the 1950s. Our world, I believe, needs this platform of common values, which of course would not be shared only by the West, but also today by the rest. And without a basic agreement of this kind, I believe it doesn't really make sense to talk about global public goods. Public goods, the notion of a public good, the acceptance of a public good, the acceptance of a governance that preserves or establishes this public good is necessarily based on common values. And if we are to efficiently address today's global challenges, which in many cases are related to the defense, promotion, protection of global public goods, we need to share a collective sense of values for a better global governance. In fact, we probably need a new declaration of global rights and responsibilities. And I can see that in the growing importance of value-based issues at the WTO itself. Rules that impact trade are there when they're established by sovereign nation states, less and less to protect producers, and more to protect consumers. Issues such as trade and health, trade and the environment, those are issues where values play an important role. For the notion that you have to address a risk has to do with your anthropological scale of what is good and what is bad. A risk scale is, in many ways, very much linked to a value system. And as traditional obstacles to trade, such as quantitative restrictions or tariffs, are decreasing, regulatory discrepancies are the ones that matter today and probably will matter more in the future. And these discrepancies risk becoming an impediment to market opening and getting the benefits of economies of scale. And the world of global trade is to some extent where Europe was in the 70s. No more tariffs, but not yet an internal market. Now, getting there, whether through harmonization or mutual recognition, whichever bit of the toolbox you use, will for sure imply a higher level of trust, and trust has to be built on a bedrock of common values. I've said before other audiences that I had the chance in my professional life, which Chris kindly summed up, of working at 3 different levels of governance, which I can compare to the 3 states of mass. The national level, which in my view represents the solid state, the European level, which is liquid, and now the international level, which is more like the gaseous mass. Now, the challenge of global governance today is to try to move from this current gaseous state to something more solid. But because of this fundamental legitimacy deficit of global governance, I do not believe, and I should say I do not believe anymore, that the solution is to globalize local problems. I believe the solution lies in localizing global problems, to make them more palatable to citizens in order to reinforce the sentiment of togetherness I referred to. Now, this requires substantial transformations of the way politics happen, but it also requires a strong leadership, not only at the international level, but above all, where it really matters for international action to take place, which is at the national level. There is no international leadership in a Westphalian order without national leadership. And of course, such leadership is easier in smaller and homogeneous countries than in bigger and diverse ones. But the stakes of strong leadership are the same for all. So, all in all, in my view, this leadership issue is the most pressing issue of global governance today, and it's no coincidence that Chris, in his introduction, has said the same thing. In other words, this confirms what you said, Chris. Although we belong to different cultural origins, the way we're thinking together in the same direction has always amazed me, and I'm pleased to say that tonight with you. Thank you.